The market in Ashenvale smelled of pine smoke and fresh bread every Saturday morning. Farmers carried their baskets in from the hills. Children ran between the stalls. And Seraphine Vale, the village healer, set out her small table near the old stone fountain, just as she had done every week for the past 6 years. Her table was nothing impressive. A few rows of dark glass bottles, small cloth pouches tied with string, a handwritten sign that read, "Healer, all welcome." The people of Ashenvale knew what those bottles could do. A mother once came to her with a child who had not stopped coughing for 2 weeks. 3 days after Seraphine's tonic, the child was out playing in the yard. That was the kind of thing people remembered. But not everyone remembered such things, and not everyone looked at her table with respect. The sound came first, a low, steady thunder of hooves on the dirt road. The market crowd stepped aside quickly, the way water moves around a stone. Alpha King Caius Dranath rode into the square at the head of a patrol, his silver wolf crest armor catching the autumn sun. He sat tall on his horse, and his expression, as always, suggested that he found everything around him slightly beneath his attention. He was the ruler of 4 wolf packs and the most powerful man in the Highland territories. Everyone in the market knew it. The way they moved out of his path made that very clear. One of his soldiers had a cut on his forearm. Not serious, but it needed cleaning. A village elder pointed the soldier toward Seraphine's table. The soldier walked over. Caius followed on his horse, looking down at her table with slow, lazy interest, the way someone looks at something they have already decided is not worth their time. "These are your medicines?" he said. His voice was calm. That almost made it worse. Seraphine looked up at him. "They are." He made a soft sound, not quite a laugh. "I would sooner send my soldier to a child with a stick," he said, loud enough for the nearest 10 people to hear. "Garden weeds and colored water do not count as medicine." He looked at his soldier. "We will handle it at the stronghold." The market went quiet. People looked at the ground. Seraphine did not look at the ground. She looked directly at him and said in a steady voice, "I hope you never need my help." Then she turned back to her work. He rode away without another word. She watched him go. For a single, unguarded moment, her hand pressed flat against the table. She had heard worse in her life. She told herself she had heard worse, but the quiet that followed in the market, that particular kind of quiet, where everyone pretends they heard nothing, stayed with her for the rest of the day. 3 weeks passed. The leaves on the highland trees turned dark red and gold. Life in Ashenvale continued as it always did, quietly, steadily, with small problems and small joys. Seraphine treated a broken finger, a bad chest cold, and an old farmer's knee that had been hurting since summer. Then, on a cold night in late October, someone knocked hard on her cottage door. She opened it to find a young soldier, breathing fast, his face pale. He spoke in broken sentences. The Alpha King's bonded wolf, Kale, a great silver animal who had run at Caius's side since both of them were young, had been struck by something in the thornwood. A cursed blade, left by a rival faction. The royal physicians had tried everything. The wolf was not healing. He was burning from the inside. He would not survive the night. Seraphine listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she asked 2 questions. What color was the wound around the edges? What did it smell like? The soldier answered, and something in her expression shifted, not panic, but recognition. She knew exactly what this was. She took her satchel from the hook by the door, pulled on her coat, and followed him out into the dark. She did not ask whether the Alpha King had sent for her. She already knew he had not. The Alpha's stronghold was a large stone building at the edge of the forest, lit with torches that threw orange light across the courtyard walls. Seraphine had never been inside it before. She was led through long corridors and into the great hall, and what she saw there stopped her for just a moment. Caius Dranath was kneeling on the stone floor beside his wolf. He was still in his armor. One hand rested flat on Kale's side, which rose and fell in short, labored breaths. The Alpha King's face, that composed, unreadable face she had seen looking down at her market stall, was completely open. There was no performance in it, no authority, just a man sitting beside the creature he loved most in the world, watching it suffer. He looked up when she entered the hall. Something moved across his face, recognition, and then something quieter, harder to name. He said her name, just her name, no title, no demand, just her name. in a voice that had most of its strength removed from it. Seraphine crossed the room without speaking. She knelt on the other side of Cale and began to examine the wound. She did not acknowledge the apology he did not yet know how to give. There would be time for that later. Right now, there was a wolf who was still alive, and that was what mattered. After a few minutes, she sat back and looked at Caius directly. She told him the truth. The wound had been caused by a cursed blade, a weapon coated in a compound that stopped wolves from healing themselves. No ordinary medicine would touch it. No pack magic could reach it. There was only one method that could work. Her grandmother had called it veil weaving, a technique where the healer used her own inner energy to restart the body's natural repair, essentially becoming a bridge that carried healing from her own life force into the injured animal. It was not painless. It was not safe for the healer. And it was, she added quietly, forbidden by the Alpha King's own law. He had declared it dark sorcery 2 years ago. She watched him understand all of it at once, the layers of the situation landing on him like stones. The only cure was a practice he had made illegal. The only person in 4 territories who could perform it was the woman he had publicly humiliated at a market 3 weeks ago. And she had come here, on her own, in the middle of the night, even knowing all of that. He asked her, in a low voice, why she had come, why she would do this at all. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered every question that deserved a real answer. Then she said that Cale had done nothing to her. She helped living creatures. That was her work. It was that simple. Caius looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and said, "Do what you need to do." She gave him 3 instructions before she began. Do not speak. Do not touch her. Do not break the silence, no matter what he saw. He agreed to all 3 without argument, something that, she suspected, he was not used to doing. Seraphine removed her coat, pushed up her sleeves, and placed both hands flat against the wound on Cale's side. She closed her eyes. The room was very quiet. And then she went somewhere inside herself, somewhere deep and still, a place she had learned to find from her grandmother's teachings, from years of practice, from all those nights reading by candlelight in a cottage full of old books. A soft light began to move under her skin. The temperature in the room dropped. Cale's short, painful breaths began to slow, then deepen. The wound on his side, which had been an angry dark red, began, very slowly, to change. Caius watched all of it from less than an arm's length away. He had been in battles. He had faced enemies twice his size. He had stood on fields where the outcome was uncertain, and held himself steady. But he had never seen anything like this. Never watched someone give away their own strength to save another living thing, and do it so quietly, without theater, without asking for anything in return. He watched her arms begin to shake. He could see the effort in her face, a fine, controlled tightness, the look of someone carrying something very heavy and choosing not to put it down. He wanted to say something. He stayed silent. He had given his word. Cale's wound closed. It did not happen all at once. It was gradual, the edges drawing together, the color returning to something normal, the wolf's breathing settling into a long, easy rhythm. And when it was finally done, Seraphine leaned sideways. Caius caught her before she reached the floor. He held her there, his hands steady under her arms, and for the first time in a very long time, he did not know what to say. He was not a man who was often without words, but there are moments that make even the most confident person go quiet, and this was one of them. She was given the best guest room in the stronghold to recover in. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was coming through the curtains. Cale was lying across the foot of the bed, watching her with calm amber eyes. Caius was in the chair beside the window. He looked like he had been there for most of the night. The conversation they had that morning was not a comfortable one. Caius was not naturally good at admitting fault. Most people who have held power for a long time are not. He started an apology twice and stopped both times. The third time, he said plainly, he had been wrong about her work, about what she was. The thing he had said in the market was the kind of careless cruelty that comes from not paying attention to people, and he had been doing that for a long time, and he would understand if she wanted nothing more to do with him. Seraphine listened to all of this, then she asked him, calmly, whether he intended to have her arrested for the veil weaving. He said no. She asked whether he would change the law. He was quiet for a longer moment. Then he said he would need to think about it carefully. She told him that was a better answer than she had expected, and she meant it. It was Cale who settled the mood of that morning. He had been listening to the entire conversation with the focused patience of an animal that understood more than it let on. At some point, he got up, walked slowly across the room, and sat down directly in front of Seraphine. Then he placed his great silver head in her lap. Wolves do not do this with strangers. They do not do this with anyone their alpha has not trusted and accepted. It was as clear as any spoken word. Caius looked at his wolf for a long time. Then he looked at Seraphine. Cale is rarely wrong about people, he said quietly. Seraphine rested her hand against Cale's head and said nothing. But she did not pull away. 2 weeks after that night, on a Saturday morning, Seraphine arrived at the market in Ashenvale and set out her usual table near the old stone fountain. Same bottles, same pouches, same handwritten sign. Around mid-morning, the market went quiet in that particular way she now recognized. Hooves on the dirt road, but this time, there was only one horse, and no armor, and no soldiers behind it. Caius walked to her stall. He stood in front of her table, and in a voice that carried clearly to everyone nearby, he said that he had made a public mistake on this exact spot 3 weeks ago, and he was correcting it now, in public. Seraphine Vale was the finest healer in the Highland territories. She was to be treated with full respect, and she had his personal protection. If anyone thought otherwise, they were welcome to bring the matter to him directly. The market was very, very still. Seraphine looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up a small jar of herb salve from the front of her table and held it out to him. "Your hands," she said. "The skin is cracking from all that armor. Use this in the evenings. It will help." He took it. He looked at it. And then, for the first time she had ever seen, Alpha King Caius Drenath almost smiled. Seraphine, it turned out, was also almost smiling. In the months that followed, things changed. Not all at once, and not easily, but in the steady, honest way that real things change. The law against veil weaving was revised. It was no longer treated as a crime. Instead, it was recognized as a specialized healing practice, one that required study and care, and Seraphine was asked to help write the new guidelines. She said yes. Working on those guidelines meant spending time at the stronghold, and she did not find that difficult. Caius remained who he was, demanding, serious, a man who held himself and everyone around him to a very high standard. That did not change. What changed was something smaller and more important. He had learned to look at people more carefully before deciding what they were worth. He noticed when his assumptions were built on habit instead of truth, and he corrected them. It was slow work, as most worthwhile changes are. Seraphine found, quietly, and somewhat to her own surprise, that she respected slow, deliberate work in a person. She had spent most of her life around quick judgments and fast words. A man who was willing to be wrong, to say so, and then to be better, that was rarer than most people admitted. Cale slept at the foot of her bed on the nights she stayed in the territory. This had started without either of them formally deciding it, and it continued without either of them formally discussing it. Some arrangements begin that way, quietly, without announcement, taking root in small moments, until one day, you look up and realize they have simply become part of how things are. Not everything that matters needs to be said out loud. Some things just grow.